that I'd like us to start with a prayer each time. And this time I'll go ahead and read it again. It was the prayer that we did last week. It was part of the lesson. Hi. Sorry. We need to open our circle up. Make more room for chairs on this side.
You need to see this true.
I can see it.
Okay.
She's gonna hold the mirror up.
Yeah, right.
I'll just twist.
I'll just turn this
And shout.
screen and people can also watch it on the screen.
Twist and shout.
Oh, there you go. I'm not gonna do readings for this. It's also closed.
It's not like there's a lot to see, it's just me talking.
Just kind of take a deep breath and relax and get centered. Let us pray. Oh God, send me this day to do the work that you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart. So this is a little introductory thing that we don't get to do because it's on a screen that we can't share. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the narrator describes a sergeant of the law, i.e. a lawyer at the top of his field, who's wealthy, distinguished, and wise. Nowhere so busy a man as he there was, the narrator tells us, and yet he seemed busier than he was. That detail tells the reader a lot about the kind of man this lawyer is. He projects even more busyness than he actually experiences. He is on a pilgrimage, after all, not at work. Because he likes to say to the world, as Bridget Jones would put it, I am very busy and important. Over 600 years later, this detail still resonates. We all know people like that. Most of us have been people like that. Maybe not quite the way this lawyer was, wanting to look like very important people in business, but simply because as a culture, we often define our value according to productivity. Being busy, having great demands on our time, means that we are doing enough, that we are working hard, and our work matters. We may also emphasize being too busy, also because we really are too busy to be able to focus, and the experience can be overwhelming. When comedian Jim Gaffigan was asked what it was like to have 5 children, he answered, imagine you're drowning and then someone hands you a baby. Many of us can empathize with that feeling in some context, especially during COVID, when demands on many people's time has increased, and it can help us commiserate with one another. In this part of the curriculum, however, Christopher suggests that we deliberately slow down. Instead of trying to do 5 things at once, he suggests deliberately and mindfully doing one thing at a time. If we're doing God's work in the world, answering God's call, it might be a good idea to pay attention to it, to realize that we are doing it, to do it with intent, and focus rather than around a cup of coffee, a baby, social media, and 2 different work projects. In this section, Christopher suggests ways to slow down and do our tasks mindfully. Idiot.
In this talk, I want to introduce the work of the 3rd chapter of my book. The book is designed so that you read 1 chapter a week. You read that chapter, which introduces a gentle practice, and then throughout that week, you practice that gentle practice and see if it's a good fit for you. The first week, we began by saying a daily prayer. Oh God, send me this day to do the work you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart. And then in times of transition, said to ourselves, the work is very near you. In the second week, we paid attention to how we look at human faces, remembering that each human face, planned, unplanned, anonymous, is a person, capital P-E-R-S-O-N. In the first week, the most important word from the daily prayer was work. In the second week, it was gladness, which reminds us of the conviviality of being with other human beings. This week, the third week, the most important word is singleness, with gladness and singleness of heart. Now notice that the word in the daily prayer and in that first practice is work, not works. The gentle practice this week is to really dig into that fact that it's work and not works. Basically, we're going to be working against multitasking. We're going to be working against multitasking by naming each work that we do. God gave us, as human beings, the power of naming things from the very beginning. Listen to this from Genesis chapter 2. Out of the ground, the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. Now, lions, tigers, and bears have already been named. That's not our work. But what has not been named is your next piece of work. You are using the power of words to name things as they come down the pike towards you. We're again tapping into the Christian poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who talked about the power of words. He wrote, "Accustom yourself to reflect on the words you use, for if words are not things, they are living powers." Words are living powers by which things of most importance to humankind are actuated, combined, and humanized. So this week, we're really digging into the power of words, naming each work that we do. So gentle practice this week really uses the power of words. It's a shift in how we approach what we're doing. And it's also really tapping into repetition. I first started using this practice around my ritual of preparing breakfast in the morning. I noticed that for a long time, I had been preparing breakfast in the morning like I was an ER doctor, where I had to multitask to do it as quickly as possible because I needed to get out the door because I am important. But really, why was I rushing? And did it really make a difference to shave off a minute, 90 seconds, or 2 minutes? I needed to slow down. I was reading the news, starting the toaster, pulling things out of the refrigerator, looking at some more news, repeat over and over again in this big condensed rush. I finally started to slow things down by naming them. I'm just going to make the toast. Going to get the butter, come back, butter the toast, eat my toast. See, sequentially, one thing at a time. Because I was doing that for breakfast, slowing down, naming each work that I was doing, it started to set a tone for the day, so that by the time I went out that front door, I was already accustomed to thinking about one work at a time and naming each work. Slowly, I was beginning to discover and live into what it says in that daily prayer. Send me this day to do the work you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart.
So Do you multitask?
What was the question?
Do you multitask? I don't want to make the assumption everybody does, but so we kind of do.
Yeah, we put the toaster down and have the coffee started and get the pan oiled and heating up. Sure, we do.
And here, my morning ritual is feeding the animals, and there is a very specific way to do it, and, this comes first, and then, anyway, yeah. So do you think, how do you feel about the concept that multitasking is problematic? Do you agree with that? Do you not agree with that? Have you ever thought about that? No, it's not problematic.
I think it depends on the situation.
Okay, can you say more about that?
Well, if your aim in doing whatever it is you're doing requires 100% focus, then it's going to be a problem. But I frequently eat and listen to the news in the morning. Now, honestly, I don't want to hear all the news in the morning. And that 5 or 10 minutes is maybe all I choose to listen to. And I don't really listen to all of it. But I'm listening enough to go, I want to hear about that. And then I'll stop eating and listen to that, news segment. So I think sometimes it's not a problem, it's just efficient. But it does, science does say that our brain can only do one thing at a time. So when we're multitasking, what we're really doing is going back and forth between the things we're doing. And so I think it's important to think about, is this something that really I need to be focused on? Or is kind of a cursory enough? So I think there's an enoughness question here.
I think as I've gotten older, my brain wants to be more focused on one thing at a time. I'm finding I have friends who can do sewing projects, 3 and 4 sewing projects. I can only do one until it's finished, and then start another. It's too hard to do too many.
I think for me, it has to do with the importance of the task. Often I'm trying to get several things done at once so that I can clear the time to have a total concentration on what I feel is really the work I need to do this day. So I think multitasking is a gift.
That's what I was thinking. I mean, God gives us the ability to do all sorts of things. So when it's appropriate, you can use your brain and your God-given talents to address additional problems.
And when I'm doing boring tasks, I often listen to a book on tape, and it helps me to get the job done without resenting it.
Yeah, I am not a fan of cooking, so the thought of being very mindful about cooking, yeah, that doesn't do it for me.
I was listening to a podcast on focus last week, and then I re-listened to it again.
Because you couldn't focus the first time. Because you couldn't focus the first time.
No, I wanted to go back and listen to it again. I was driving the first time, and then said I wanted to go back. And one of the points, the psychologist who'd done all these studies, was talking about multitasking, but also talking about interruptions and we tend to self-interrupt, and how much time we waste by moving from the thing that we interrupted ourselves for to get back to it. When we got up to go get a cup of coffee, or when we got up to go do something else, we stopped doing what we were doing, and it takes, I forget the amount of time, but it's an incredible amount of time that we do it. And so that does, and they were talking about how many screens you have open on your computer, and you go back and forth, whether it's, I'm working on this, but I'm gonna check email. And then whatever you were writing or working on, that's your self-interruption. And so I understand multitasking, I do it, but I was really struck by that, can I focus and not try to answer an email in the middle of writing a sermon?
Well, so that's interesting you would mention that, because I was going to sort of, so what all of you were saying, what I'm hearing you say, for the most part, I think we do mostly all multitask. Everything that you all mentioned that I heard was about productivity and being able to be more productive and to be able to get things done so that you can devote time to something that you want to be single-minded about. But the flip side of that is, are there also situations where you're multitasking so that you don't have to fully engage in one thing or another because it's painful, because you don't like it, because, et cetera, sort of to your point, and I think therein lies a little bit of the problem. Email, I think, is a perfect example. When I don't want to do something, go pick up the phone and look at my email, and there's not going to be anything there. The world could live without it.
So in other words, multitasking is serving the purpose of helping to somewhat distract us from something that we really didn't want to be doing.
Sometimes I think so, yeah.
The other thing too, I think that, I don't know that it's a direct connection, but it might be, our society-wise ability to focus, sustain focus, has shrunk enormously in my lifetime. Even in my kids' lifetime, their Sesame Street segments, the little blurbs, and I'm making up numbers because I don't know what they are, I don't remember, but we're probably like 2.5 minutes each. Now they're 30 seconds. So we don't teach our kids to entertain themselves, to stay focused. We used to go for allergy shots every week, and we had to wait an hour to make sure we didn't die. And my brother and I sat at the window and counted red cars or blue cars or whatever, there was no little toy section, there was no video going. You drove a car, you counted license plates, you fought with each other, you sang, now kids have a video sitting there, for a 5-minute drive. And so I think society as a whole is encouraging, or is discouraging focus and encouraging, multitasking and impatience. And that might be a piece of this.
I think so too. You look like you wanted to say something.
You?
Yeah.
You? I agree, though, I totally agree.
Well, I found it interesting because I get up at 5 o'clock.
I know, right?
I set breakfast, I shower, get ready to go, I walk the dog for a mile,
Half an hour.
and then we go work out at the rec center, we come home, fix breakfast, and then read 2 newspapers, the Post and the USA Today. And I do all that between 5 and 8. And I was just amazed. But I don't think I'm multitasking, but I'm just doing a lot of things. And you get into a routine, that this is what you got to do before you're out the door or, get into the business of the day.
I was struck by his example about breakfast, and, I would think that, I would have thought that making breakfast is the task. But he said, no, there's toast. And then there's butter in the toast. And so there are these sub-tasks that I would, fold into. I'm not listening to anything. I'm not listening to the radio or doing anything like that. So my focus is getting everything ready to eat. But there are multiple little tasks in there. While the toast is cooking, I'm doing something else because I'm not going to sit there and watch the toaster. So.
Well, and if you want your eggs hot at the same time as your toast, you better get them cooking.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine a mother of 2 putting up with this very long.
Remind a mother of 5, right?
Jim was relating to you our first 2 to 3 hours in the morning. But once we get home from the rec center and we start breakfast, it's kind of like a symphony, because our kitchen's large enough that we have a white table in between, in the middle. So we have to kind of dance around the table. But we're doing our toast. He butters his, I avocado mine. We have 2 pans of eggs, because mine's broken and fully cooked. But I mean, we dance around everything and we get it done and we sit down and eat. It's just kind of like a symphony. After what he said, just buttered toast, yeah.
Well, and so I think that sounds to me less like multitasking and more like just a rhythm, a structure that you use to get things done. And as Rod would say, because I make fun of him a lot for just, it's like everything is just so, done like this and, and.
Is he an engineer?
That's an engineer.
Yeah, I know, I wasn't gonna say anything, but yes, that's absolutely it. But his excuse for that, which is a really good excuse, if I don't do it that way, I'm gonna forget to do one of those things. So, okay, I'll give you that. Anyway, before we go on to the next one, this doesn't have anything to do with multitasking, but more along the lines of paying attention to what we're doing. And my question to you is, have you ever been on the road to go somewhere and get there and realize that you don't remember anything between when you left or some chunk from when you left? That to me is when I bring that to my mind frequently to remind myself how often I can get engrossed in other things or many things and not really focus on one thing and do it well. Anyway, I think we're ready for that.
In this talk, we are halfway through the 3rd chapter of my book, and we are focusing on the gentle practice of naming each work. It's important to remember it's each work and not works. Part of what we're doing is getting into the practice of focusing on one thing at a time, which is why we're keyed into the word from the daily prayer, singleness of heart. We're picking up on Genesis chapter 2 also, where God gives to Adam the power to name the animals, and he parades them in front of Adam, who names each one. Lions and tigers and bears are already named, but what's not named is whatever our next work is, and that's what we're focusing on. Last week I gave you the example of the way I prepare breakfast. One of my students, Brigitte, who's over 80 years old and lives alone, started using this practice walking up and downstairs, and she says that the confidence that she feels is remarkable now that she's focusing on one thing at a time and using her words. This week, what I want to focus on is rich words that give us an even greater sense of power and of God's presence. I want to share with you 2 examples of that. I serve a downtown church that has a very small parking lot. And people presume on a regular basis that they can park there and go run their errands or go to the hairdresser who's just around the corner or go to the church next door that's not our church. So I'm frequently in the situation where I have to ask people not to park. And that has always filled me with a lot of fear because people don't hesitate to attack me, at least verbally, for catching them, I think. Sometimes it just comes out of shame, sometimes it comes out of presumption. When I first started using this practice, I took on the word boundary so that when I got out of my car to go and confront the person who had presumed to park in our parking lot, I knew that I was holding a boundary on behalf not just of myself, but of the people that I serve, both the parishioners who use our campus regularly and from the preschool that we host. I am holding a boundary on behalf of them. And it gave me a calm strength. And sure enough, within a month or 2 of starting to use that word boundary, I was attacked viciously, verbally, by people who had parked there. I was wearing my collar. What kind of a Christian are you, not letting me park here? Sorry, you can't park here. And I would say to myself calmly, clearly, I am holding a boundary. It's calm and clear. The word boundary did exactly what Coleridge said words can do. You may remember he said that they are living powers that actuate, combine, and humanize. It's exactly what boundary did for me. Another challenge I face is the way that I drive. I like to drive, or I have the goal of driving virtuously, and specifically with the virtue of courtesy, to treat others as I would be treated, and to be a gentleman as I drive, aware, essentially following the rules, driving such that others can also drive well. So this is what I strive for. The thing that I find most challenging is to do all of that without constantly judging the other drivers who are not driving as attentively as I, or thoughtfully, or with attention to others in the way that I try to drive. So this is a constant challenge, and sometimes I do it well, and sometimes I fall off the wagon. Imagine then a day where I hold a boundary in that parking lot, get in my car, and drive home courteously without any sense of judgment for all 7 minutes of driving home. I can begin to imagine that if I do things like that, stringing together clear single actions with some sense of virtue, that I am creating something like a poem out of my life. That's the potential here of this practice of naming each work, turning your daily life into something like a beautiful line of poetry.
Let's see. So what do you think, looking at something, and what's the significance to you of looking at something and giving it a name, something or an idea or a person or whatever, of giving it a name? I think that's an interesting question. I want to hear your answer.
Well, I've given some names to other drivers.
And what's the significance of that?
Do you want me to tell you what the significance of that is? He's number one.
So what's interesting about this is very familiar to me, because this is, I did talk to this church about the practice of gratitude, and that's exactly what this is. Gratitude is viewed as a virtue, and so you are approaching everything in your life, mundane, ordinary, lofty, with an appreciation of that virtue of gratitude, and you're naming it with gratitude. Maybe not as specific as our guide is telling us, giving it a specific name, like another driver on the but you're still using that lens of acknowledging it, naming it, and saying, I am grateful for all the people who made my toast, including the farmer. So that's kind of where it's hard to do, but that's kind of my approach. So this is familiar to me in my practice.
Kind of muddies it to me. I had to go back and look at that. So where's he trying to go with this? I mean,
To me, naming, and I don't remember how the scripture goes, but to me, naming changes the power. That when you name something intentionally, then you have some power over that. It doesn't have the same power over you. It's sort of a different, to me, it's a bit like the difference between I have to do the dishes and I get to do the dishes.
Right.
And
Sort
I'm
of like
thankful I have dishes to do.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
it gets
Seriously.
down to that granular
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, but it changes the power structure, I think.
Yeah.
But I like that blending them together, the virtue and the name together. So, is there a problem that you have in your day, something that you don't want to do that comes up on a recurring basis that you can, yeah, I know, I've got one. Writing is fun. Anyway, that you could assign a word to that might give you the power for that to be a less unpleasant experience.
Sometimes I get emails basically saying that the problem I had reported was something I did wrong, for example. It's kind of a very generic description, but, and when I see like one or two people's names on the email, it gives me this, feeling, uh-oh, it's gonna be one of these emails. And the word that I wrote down was curious. I've taken a couple of classes at Crucial Conversations, I don't know if folks are. And so one of the key questions is, why would a rational, reasonable person, like do this or exhibit this behavior? And for me, that kind of behind that question is curious, rather than just getting frustrated or feeling like they don't understand me or that they don't believe me. Maybe more, I think, curious. Curious. Why would they do it? And I think that does, for me, make the situation different.
When I was a farmer's agent, I actually had somebody calling people to get information, and I had to make, rather than a cold call, I called it a warm call, but it still wasn't the greatest thing to do in the world. But I think I got over that by thinking every time I got a no, I'm not going to change companies, I'm not going to go with you, I was closer to a yes. And you got to figure out something in your mind that keeps you doing that. Otherwise, you'll say, I'm never doing this again. Always remember it. When I started doing that, somebody said, one of these days, that phone is going to look like a 100-pound gorilla and you won't be able to lift it up. And they were true.
So in some ways, what you're talking about is reframing whatever you're,
I think so.
trying to see it from a different angle. Gratitude, curious, boundary.
Well, I know Kip does some of this, and I do it too, and we haven't seen somebody at our men's group for a while. We'll make a call to them, and those aren't easy calls to make either, because you got to kind of force yourself to do them. But you do it because every once in a while you really get hold of somebody that needed to hear your voice, or they call back and they were really nice, and thank you for calling and so forth. So that's keeps you going sometimes in things you don't want to do.
And part of the reason why I do that, at least myself, is that someday I might be the one who needs that call, and I hope that I get it. And so it's partially selfish.
So I have a question that's interesting to me. Why do you not, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, what is it that makes you not want to make the call?
I think in your mind, you say, okay, I haven't seen this person for a month, but they'll be there next time. And so you say, well, maybe if I just wait longer, I'll see them and I won't have to make this call. And so I think what makes me not want to make the call is hoping that it'll resolve itself, and it usually doesn't.
Yesterday, okay, this I got to tell you, because I called Steve Kane to ask on Linda, and she's doing better. And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe I'll call Richard Manning. But then I said, you know what? Richard's been putting out emails. I'll wait to see. And it wasn't within an hour. You put out the email that you got from Richard. It's kind of like, oh, well, That was a good call.
Can you think of something in our culture? Wait, give an example. We're focusing on in repeating the name of something or someone gives the moment power. Something in our culture, we're focusing on and repeating the name of something or someone brings power to the moment.
A few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, we had an adult forum class on forgiveness, and who was it? Barbara Taylor Brown, I forget whose book it was, but she talked about, in one of her kind of practices, if there was a particular person who was kind of who given you so much trouble or something, and she just said, during the day, a few times, say that person's name. Don't do anything else. Just say that name, naming it or naming that person. And, over time, that was a helpful, not always perfect, but a helpful way to get toward some state of forgiveness toward that person.
I don't know if this is culture, although I think it could extend to that. And I've told this story before, but I don't remember when I last told it. But, and so some of you may have heard it, may not. I had a friend, he was the Buddhist minister in Berkeley, and Berkeley, California. He was teaching his daughter to drive. And so he was sitting in the passenger seat, and his daughter was driving, cursing the other drivers, just screaming about these other crappy drivers on San Pablo in Berkeley. And he said, so-and-so, I forget what her name was, they're bodhisattvas. They are these beings in Buddhism who help you attain nirvana. They point out these things to you that you need to pay attention to and all of that kind of stuff. These are bodhisattvas. Be thankful for the bodhisattvas on the road that are showing you all of these things. And then he said, the next week the situation was reversed. She was sitting in the passenger seat, and he was driving, and started getting very, very angry at other drivers. And she said, Dad, they're bodhisattvas. I said, damn, bodhisattvas. But I think that there is that sense to say, can we relanguage something that's really negative into something that would say this is a teacher, which is what that was all about. And even if we find ourselves saying damn teacher, at least we're calling that to mind, we have to sort of reevaluate. So I think that would work culturally, not just bad drivers, but in other ways as well. What's it teaching us?
Unfortunately, I taught my daughter how to drive, and she drives like me. That's not good.
I think something that helps me is the term dignity of choice. When people are doing things that I personally think are really stupid and that they should change, I need to remember that I have the dignity of choosing how I live, and I need to give them the same grace to make stupid decisions and, do things in ways that aren't helpful. And so for me, dignity of choice, giving the dignity of choice is a helpful thing.
And that to me kind of goes back to, I think it was last week's lesson about person with all capital letters. That is kind of encompassed in that for me, so it gives me something simple to remember, but it's all encompassed in that capital letter person.
Just following up on that, something in our culture, it used to be homeless people, and now it's a person
People
experiencing homelessness. So I think there's got something in our culture that is trying to reframe how we view.
Same thing with people with disabilities.
Yes.
Just the terminologies.
Well,
We're working towards it.
it's not identifying the whole person by the one thing that's wrong with them. But the question, so I'm reading this book called when we walk by, which I feel like we've got to do a book study on at some point in this parish, because it is an amazing book. But anyway, what other population of people in the world do we refer to simply by housing, or whether, where they live? Well, apart from country, but you know what I mean? The structure or that they live or don't live in. We don't talk about that anyway.
Yeah, apartment dwellers over there, people that live more than 700 square feet over there, yeah.
Okay. Anything else about naming?
Just about the bad drivers, when they go by. My first thing is, yeah, I don't live there. It's a matter of encouraging themselves. Do they know how dangerous this is?
Or maybe
So
their
don't get
wife's in
angry at
labor,
them.
yeah, maybe their wife's in labor,
Yeah, there might be a good reason, but especially when they're going 100 miles and I'm going 60. This isn't going to work.
I didn't notice until now that you put the questions up
What's that?
there. I just now noticed that you put the questions up there. So, let's go ahead and go to lesson 3.
You want the third one?
Yeah, we already talked about busyness.
So far, I've shared with you 3 gentle practices that you can practice in your daily life. To say a daily prayer, and then the work is very near you in times of transition. To look at each human face and remember that they are a person, and to name each work that you are doing. Each of these, as I said, are daily practices. This week's practice, which is in chapter 4 of the book, is a weekly practice. It is a weekly prayer followed by 5 to 10 minutes of reflection where we remember the week that has passed and look forward to the week that is to come. We begin this Sabbath reflection with a prayer, which is, "O God, in your light we see light. Help me reflect on the week that has passed, that I may remember in truth, and on the week to come, that I may be ready to do all such good works as thou hast prepared for me to walk in the name of Jesus, the light of the world." As we think about the week that has passed, one thing that we can specifically focus on is, have we practiced the 3 gentle practices we know so far? If so, what happened? What did it feel like? What did we learn? What shifted for us? This is an opportunity to consolidate and strengthen the ways in which we're improving the posture of our soul, and so making us more available to listen to and respond to God's call in our daily life. Now, it's important to do this on Sunday before church for 2 reasons. The first is that it's part of an effort to really reclaim the Sabbath in your life. Recovering Sabbath practice is a key to Christian maturity. You may remember in the beginning of the 2nd chapter of Genesis, it tells us that on the 7th day, God rested and saw that all that God had created was very good. And so we're imitating God in that way. And even Jesus teaches in, for example, Mark chapter 2, that while human beings weren't made for the Sabbath was made for human beings. So if we don't enter into Sabbath, it is as though we are rejecting an invitation, a gift from God. We do this before we go and worship, because at the end of the liturgy, we are sent out into the world to begin a new week. So this is a perfect opportunity to enter into worship knowing what the past week was like and anticipating with some sense of wisdom what's going to be coming down the pike for us. When I first started doing this prayer, I really enjoyed going into the church 10 minutes early before the 8 o'clock service, which is more quiet, and doing my prayer and Sabbath reflection in the church. One of my students, Judy, did the same thing. She goes to the 10 o'clock service and she's the head of the altar guild. So that even though she was sitting in the pew with her eyes closed, people were saying, Judy, what do I do with the purificator? And so on. So find the place that works best for you on Sunday morning. The prayer is all about light, which we will unpack some more in the next talk. Again, the prayer is, "O God, in your light we see light. Help me reflect on the week that has passed, that I may remember in truth, and on the week to come, that I may be ready to do all such good works as thou hast prepared for me to walk in." And then go chronologically. Worship on Sunday, Sunday afternoon, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, remembering general highlights, and again remembering specifically, when did I use the prayer, "The work is very near you"? When was I looking at human faces with particular attention? What happened? And when was I naming each work, and what was that like? Again, this is an opportunity to consolidate. The second half of the prayer you may recognize. It's taken from the post-communion prayer in Rite 1, which is why it has that archaic language, "that I may be ready to do all such good works as thou hast prepared for me to walk in." Pause a minute and think about that. What a stunning idea. God has already prepared good works for us to walk in the week to come. And it's good to be reminded of that as we anticipate what's going to be coming down the pike for us in the next 7 days. When you've done that, there's then the opportunity, the invitation to conclude with the Lord's Prayer and then make your way to worship. So this is the fourth practice, the Sabbath prayer.
Getting longer.
What was that?
They're getting longer. Remember one, it starts out with about 5 words and 2 sentences, and this one's got about 4.
So, to me, this is the examine prayer.
Yep.
Part of it, because obviously the examine prayer talks, well, at the end, you think about what you can do in the future, and he has incorporated that, and then you also include Thanksgiving. But definitely that look back, where was I, what was my, the examine is daily, so it would be what happened today, where was I separated from God in the day?
So what are some ways that might be helpful for you to remember how you use your general practices during the week? Personally, I'm sort of thinking this little book.
Same for me, I have a work journal essentially, so writing things down.
What do you think about this, doing this practice, taking this up? How do you feel about that? Is that an instant, there's not any way I'm gonna be able to do that, or I might give it a try, or it sounds like a good idea?
Well, I had an instant, not on Sunday. You know, I'm here, I leave my house at 7 o'clock. I'm not adding 10 more minutes to my Sunday morning. I could do it Saturday night. And you know, in the Jewish world, that's Sabbath already.
Sure.
I think you have to make it so it's gonna be doable, or we won't do it, you know.
And he just suggested that.
Right, I'm just, yeah.
And that would be, to me, more like an exam too, is at the end of the day.
I like how he asks people to recognize a personal Sabbath, because I don't think we do that. And I think that's really important for everyone to do, clergy, non-clergy.
So do we get hung up when it comes to doing something like this? I mean, I notice it's just an observation that everybody's really quiet now.
I think we're thinking of, okay, where can I do this where I'm not gonna be distracted? When can I do this when I'm not gonna be distracted?
I think that's part of the discipline of carving out a personal Sabbath, because there's never a good time. And
You have to make
you
it.
say, this is
Yeah.
God, this is the gift from God to rest. So you can do the other things the next day or the next hour. Maybe a personal Sabbath can only be a couple hours.
Because of what has happened to me, I'm starting to learn how to breathe. And I'm thinking, one of the exercises in this book, which I have not started doing the exercises yet, I just read it this morning. That would be the perfect time for me to lay down on the floor, do the breathing, and think about the week. And I'm thinking, that might work.
That's not multitasking.
No, it isn't, because I'm concentrating
Yeah, no,
on
I
breathing,
Being mindful.
breathing the words of the week in.
I think you stop and think, for me personally, when I found out Bev's lungs were filled with blood clots, and the doctor said if you had taken her home that night, there's a good chance she would have passed away.
Blows my mind.
Just stop and think. And they did emergency surgery and they sucked out the blood clots, but boy, it makes you stop and think.
I like to do the examine in the evening, just to sort of straighten myself out.
I like it because I like to look backwards. I analyze. So it fits my mode of prayer because I like to analyze. But I also like to release that analysis and that anxiety that comes with that personality trait. And that's why I do like it, because it creates a leap into something else.
So doing it in the morning for a week ahead and a week that passed seems counterintuitive.
That's what?
Sort of, it bucks what I already am doing.
I kind of agree with you, and that's why I sort of question me. I've only ever done the examine at the end of the day. I can't imagine doing it at the beginning, and I don't know that I would have to write things down for every day anyway in order to be able to do this at the end of the week or the beginning of a new week. Yeah, daily examine. I think we both agree.
But the idea of creating sort of a special day is interesting.
That's true. Yeah.
Making that more consciously a day when you would seek rest. That'd be interesting.
So
It
maybe
just doesn't work for clergy.
But not on Sunday.
Yeah.
But see, I was sort of thinking it could. It could, for me, anyway, not. And also, as we were just talking about daily examine, to take all of that, if I'm doing it in the evenings, to take all of that from what I remember and then try to create Sabbath on Sunday morning or sometime on Sunday by recapping that and using. I would just really like to be able to do that on Sunday morning and then leave the service with the prayer, the words from that prayer is ascending out. That feels horrible. it's gonna happen. But I'll try it. Willing to try it. Trying all of these things.
You know, I think that, thinking about your clergy comment, our priest in Canada, you know, I grew up where Sunday dinner was a thing. You know, I mean, it was a roaster, it was chicken, or, you know, it was a thing, and it was an event. And I remember the white hairs of the congregation being shocked when our priest said, well, our Sunday dinner is hot dogs in front of the TV with the Ed Sullivan Show. Because by the time we're done with church, we're done. You know, and they had a Sabbath Sunday that went across all the cultural norms. You know, there was no formal Sunday dinner nonsense. This is, you know, hot dogs or cereal, take your pick, and we're done with work for the day. And so I think that the lesson I learned from that is Sabbath can be any day you can find time. You can set aside for Sabbath. It does not need to start at 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever. It can be whatever piece of a day or whatever piece of a week that you can do within the confines of the demands of everything, and set it aside as sacred time. And so that's why I guess I say, you know, Sunday's not going to work for me. Sunday morning is not going to work for me, but I could certainly do Saturday. It's the end of my workday. I have an 11-hour workday, and then I'm like, okay, now I'm going to stop. And so I think that's something that, you know, is not something that I would have thought, you know, growing up, that was even a possibility, till I ran into this priest who was like, heck no, we don't do that. You know, noon, we're on Sabbath time, we're moving on here.
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line is he's saying, it's developing a mature, that's very good. Understanding, yeah. So, I think that's the key in referring back to the very beginning where we're multitasking. Now, can you carve some time out in your week, or hopefully week, but just create a Sabbath time, because most of us probably don't do it. The final video, I think, is covered nicely in the recap. I don't know, since particularly because time's up. I think you can read that and the takeaway and get all you need out of that. But I think just again summarizing for the week is trying to develop a Sabbath, create and keep a Sabbath time, and I really like the power behind naming something, whether it's empowering yourself with a word towards something that's difficult for you, or nice names for bad drivers, or whatever. So anyway, thanks for being here. We'll see you. I won't see you next week. You will see them next week. I'm not here next week.
You're not here next week? Okay, so you'll be. That's fine. Okay, you're not here. Okay, you're in Canoga.
Canoga.